b n n 0 to 1 n n n n n n n n n. That progress can take one of two forms. Horizontal or extensive progress means copying things that work going from 1 to n. Horizontal progress is easy to imagine because we already know what it looks like. If you have a typewriter and build a word processor, you have made vertical progress, n, at the macro level. The single word for horizontal progress is globalization, taking things that work somewhere and making them work everywhere. China is the paradigmatic example of globalization. Its 20-year plan is to become like the United States is today. For example, 1815 to 1914 was a period of both rapid technological development and rapid globalization. Between the First World War and Kissinger's trip to reopen relations with China in 1971, there was rapid technological development but not much globalization. Since 1971, we have seen rapid globalization along with limited technological development, mostly confined to IT. NTHI's age of globalization has made it easy to imagine that the decades ahead will bring more convergence and more sameness. My own answer to the contrarian question is that most people think the future of the world will be defined by globalization. But the truth is that technology matters more. In a world of scarce resources, globalization without new technology is unsustainable. And NEW technology has never been an automatic feature of history. That doesn't mean our parents were wrong to imagine a better future, or they were only wrong to expect it as something automatic. b n n 0 to 1 n n n n n n n mania. September 1998 March 2000 NDOT.com mania was intense but short. 18 months of insanity from September 1998 to March 2000. It was a Silicon Valley gold rush. There was money everywhere, and no shortage of exuberant, often sketchy people to chase it. Every week, dozens of new startups competed to throw the most lavish launch party. Landing parties were much more rare. Paper millionaires would rack up $1,000 dinner bills and try to pay with shares of their startup's stock. Sometimes it even worked. Legions of people decamped from their well-paying jobs to found or join startups. Usually, it's considered weird to be a 40-year-old graduate student. Usually, it's considered insane to start a half-dozen companies at once. But in the late 90s, people could believe that was a winning combination. Everybody should have known that the mania was unsustainable. The most successful companies seem to embrace a sort of anti-business model where they lost money as they grew. By the time it bottomed out at 114 in October 2002, the country had long since interpreted the market's collapse as a kind of divine judgment against the technological optimism of the 90s. The era of cornucopian hope was relabeled as an era of crazed greed and declared to be definitely over. Everyone learned to treat the future as fundamentally indefinite, and to dismiss as an extremist anyone with plans big enough to be measured in years instead of quarters. Globalization replaced technology as the hope for the future. Make incremental advances, and grand visions inflated the bubble. So they should not be indulged. Anyone who claims to be able to do something great is suspect. And anyone who wants to change the world should be more humble. You should not know what your business will do. Planning is arrogant and inflexible. Sales matters just as much as product. And it's true that there was a bubble in technology. The late 90s was a time of hubris. People believed in going from 0 to 1. The market high of March 2000 was obviously a peak of insanity. Less obvious but more important, it was also a peak of clarity. The most contrarian thing of all is not to oppose the crowd but to think for yourself. There's an enormous difference between perfect competition and monopoly. And most businesses are much closer to one extreme than we commonly realize. Confusion comes from a universal bias for describing market conditions in self-serving ways. Both monopolists and competitors are incentivized to bend the truth. Monopoly lies. Monopolists lie to protect themselves. But is it one? Let's say that Google is primarily a search engine. So even if Google completely monopolized U.S. search engine advertising, it would own just 3–4% of the global advertising market. The fatal temptation is to describe your market extremely narrowly so that you dominate it by definition. Suppose you want to start a restaurant that serves British food in Palo Alto. But that's only true if the relevant market is the market for British food specifically. And what if all the restaurants in nearby towns are part of the relevant market as well? NTHESE are hard questions. But the bigger problem is that you have an incentive not to ask them at all. In contrast to the competitive local restaurant market, PayPal was at that time the only email-based payments company in the world. We employed fewer people than the restaurants on Castro Street did. But our business was much more valuable than all of those restaurants combined. But, like the lack of British restaurants in Palo Alto, maybe that's a good thing. Monopolists exaggerate their distinction by defining their market as the intersection of various smaller markets. British food restaurant Palo Alto, rap star hackers sharks, monopolists. By contrast, disguise their monopoly by framing their market as the union of several large markets. Search engine, mobile phones, wearable computers, self-driving cars, what does a monopolist's union story look like in practice? But really it's competition, not business. That is like war. Allegedly necessary, supposedly valiant, but ultimately destructive. Why do people compete with each other? It's not at all clear why they should be fighting, since they have nothing to fight about. Capulet is Google. But as they grew, they began to focus on each other. A Canadian company called NetSecure launched its own card reader in a half-moon shape. Each company was obsessed with defeating its rivals, precisely because there were no substantive differences to focus on. Consider the Shakespearean conflict between Larry Ellison, co-founder and CEO of Oracle, and Tom Siebel, a top salesman at Oracle and Ellison's protege before he went on to found Siebel Systems in 1993. So Ellison was probably thrilled when in 1996 a small database company called Informix put up a billboard near Oracle's Redwood Shores headquarters that read, "Caution, Dinosaur Crossing." The ad wasn't even really aimed at Oracle as an entity, let alone the consuming public. It was a personal attack on Ellison. Right to be greatness, not to stir without great argument. NBUT greatly to find quarrel in a straw, NWHEN honors at the stake. NFOR Hamlet. Greatness means willingness to fight for reasons as thin as an eggshell. Anyone would fight for things that matter. True heroes take their personal honor so seriously they will fight for things that don't matter. 0 to 1 last mover advantage. Escaping competition will give you a monopoly. But even a monopoly is only a great business if it can endure in the future. Compare the value of the New York Times Company with Twitter. But a great business is defined by its ability to generate cash flows in the future. Investors expect Twitter will be able to capture monopoly profits over the next decade, while newspapers' monopoly days are over. NS Imply stated, The value of a business today is the sum of all the money it will make in the future. Most of the value of low-growth businesses is in the near term. When I projected our future cash flows, I found that 75% of the company's present value would come from profits generated in 2011 and beyond. Hard to believe for a company that had been in business for only 27 months. It now appears that most of the company's value will come from 2020 and beyond. LinkedIn is another good example of a company whose value exists in the far future. As of early 2014, its market capitalization was $24.5 billion, very high for a company with less than $1 billion in revenue and only $21.6 million in net income for 2012. For a company to be valuable, it must grow and endure. But many entrepreneurs focus only on short-term growth. However, you can hit those numbers and still overlook deeper, harder to measure problems that threaten the durability of your business. For example, rapid short-term growth at both Zynga and Groupon distracted managers and investors from long-term challenges. If you treat the future as something definite, it makes sense to understand it in advance and to work to shape it. All he can do is wait for it to happen. So he might as well eat, drink, and be merry in the meantime. Hence Europe's famous vacation mania. Indefinite pessimism. A definite pessimist believes the future can be known. But since it will be bleak, he must prepare for it. Perhaps surprisingly, China is probably the most definitely pessimistic place in the world today. Every other country is afraid that China is going to take over the world. China is the only country afraid that it won't. And China can grow so fast only because its starting base is so low. Every class of people in China takes the future deadly seriously. Indefinite optimism. NTO, a definite optimist. The future will be better than the present if he plans and works to make it better. The Manhattan Project was started in 1941 and had already produced the world's first nuclear bomb by 1945. You can still visit the Bay Model in that Sausalito warehouse. But today it's just a tourist attraction. Big plans for the future have become archaic curiosities. In the 1950s, Americans thought big plans for the future were too important to be left to experts. Indefinite optimism. After a brief pessimistic phase in the 1970s, indefinite optimism has dominated American thinking ever since 1982, when a long bull market began and finance eclipsed engineering as the way to approach the future. He expects to profit from the future but sees no reason to design it concretely. Instead of working for years to build a new product, indefinite optimists rearrange already invented ones. Whether you were born in 1945 or 1950 or 1955, things got better every year for the first 18 years of your life. And it had nothing to do with you. But they missed the even bigger social context for their own preferred explanations. A whole generation learned from childhood to overrate the power of chance and underrate the importance of planning. Finance epitomizes indefinite thinking because it's the only way to make money when you have no idea how to create wealth. In a financialized world, it unfolds like this, and the founders don't know what to do with it. So they give it to a large bank. And the bankers don't know what to do with it. So they diversify by spreading it across a portfolio of institutional investors. And institutional investors don't know what to do with their managed capital. So they diversify by amassing a portfolio of stocks. And companies try to increase their share price by generating free cash flows. But in an indefinite world, people actually prefer unlimited optionality. Money is more valuable than anything you could possibly do with it. Only in a definite future is money a means to an end, not the end itself. In indefinite politics, politicians have always been officially accountable to the public at election time. But today they are attuned to what the public thinks at every moment. We are more fascinated today by statistical predictions of what the country will be thinking in a few weeks' time than by visionary predictions of what the country will look like 10 or 20 years from now. And it's not just the electoral process, the very character of government has become indefinite, too. It's no surprise that entitlement spending has eclipsed discretionary spending every year since 1975. But according to the indefinite logic of entitlement spending, we can make things better just by sending out more checks. In indefinite philosophy, you can see the shift to an indefinite attitude not just in politics but in the political philosophers whose ideas underpin both left and right. The philosophy of the ancient world was pessimistic. Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, and Lucretius all accepted strict limits on human potential. From Herbert Spencer on the right and Hegel in the center to Marx on the left. The 19th century shared a belief in progress. He didn't have any more concrete ideas about the good society than Rawls. Both of them focused on process. Biotech is difficult because we didn't design our bodies. And the more we learn about them, the more complex they turn out to be. Today it's possible to wonder whether the genuine difficulty of biology has become an excuse for biotech startups' indefinite approach to business in general. And if American companies were investing, they could expect to reap the rewards of new wealth in the future. But U.S. households are saving almost nothing. Definite optimism works when you build the future you envision. Definite pessimism works by building what can be copied without expecting anything new. Darwin himself wrote that life tends to progress without anybody intending it. Every living thing is just a random iteration on some other organism. And the best iterations win. Darwin's theory explains the origin of trilobites and dinosaurs. But can it be extended to domains that are far removed? Just as Newtonian physics can't explain black holes or the Big Bang. It's not clear that Darwinian biology should explain how to build a better society or how to create a new business out of nothing. Hence all the headlines like Digital Darwinism, .com Darwinism, and Survival of the Clickiest. Never in engineering-driven Silicon Valley. The buzzwords of the moment call for building a lean startup that can adapt and evolve to an ever-changing environment. But iteration without a bold plan won't take you from 0 to 1. A company is the strangest place of all for an indefinite optimist. Why should you expect your own business to succeed without a plan to make it happen?